You're listening to the Fresh Hell podcast. Fresh Hell contains stories of a disturbing and often graphic nature and is intended for a mature audience. Please don't let your kids listen to this, or they might turn out like us.
Hi, I'm Annie from the US.
And I'm Johanna from Austria, and you're listening to your favorite international podcast. The podcast hosted by two online friends from two continents who have never met in real life.
Nope.
But we do meet once a week in this virtual space and talk all things murder, mystery, and macabre. Well, almost every week. I apologize for not being here last week. As Annie already told you, we had some scheduling issues. We usually record on Tuesdays. Yes, we are very last-minute people.
Yeah, we were recording on Thursdays for like a hot minute, but now we are definitely on that frantic last-minute sort of schedule, which is fine. I think we're at our best when we are in an absolute panic.
I think so.
Yeah, it's fine.
Most of the time we do keep Tuesday afternoons free, but I kind of messed up and I still don't know how that happened. I purchased theater tickets for Tuesday and not Wednesday as I had planned, and I didn't realize it until, I think, Monday, and I told Annie, I'm sorry, I have theater tickets for tomorrow. I don't know how that happened.
It's the best excuse.
But Annie did an amazing job, as always, when she's alone, and I was in a theater enjoying Hunchback of Notre Dame with my husband, and I can highly recommend that one.
I love it. Yeah, no, if you can go to the theater, always go to the theater. We understand. I understand. I'm constantly getting doctor's appointments that I can't change on Tuesdays. They're like, we can see you on Tuesday, the whatever. And it's like, oh, that's an all-day test. Like, is there any other day? They're like, the next available is 9 months from that date. And you're like, fucking fine. Ugh. Yeah.
So yeah,
no problem.
Theater
No problem.
and doctor appointments trumps podcast.
Yeah, things happen. What are you going to do? We do want to say a huge thank you to all of our listeners for your support and your downloads. The nicest messages. Doug, I'm behind on emailing you back. I'm sorry. I'm so behind on everything, y'all. It's fine. But your ratings and reviews really do kind of keep us going. We have the best listeners out there. We really do. I know probably everybody says that and they feel like they have to say that to like pander, but we don't have to do that because you guys are really the best. Sincerely.
We are straightforward people. We would tell you suck if you suck.
Yeah, we would.
Trust
We'd
us.
be like, you know
I'm
what?
Austrian. That's almost German. So.
It's almost, it's German adjacent. Yeah. So, sorry, Opus is a little under the weather today, so he's home, and he's not wanting me to shut the door to the office. He keeps headbutting it, so, sorry about that. Okay, so, yeah, we love you. You're the best. And, of course, we also want to send a very special shout-out to our newest Patreon members, and they are Megan Sick and Lee Miller. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You are both murder members, murder tier, so keep your eyes out for our game day links. Our next game night, December 19th. That's coming up. I'm also going to be sending out pins for the last couple months of Murder Tier members. So if you joined a few months ago and you're like, I still don't have my Hellion pin. I know. They're like the best. And you're just every day checking that mailbox for it. Don't panic. I'm sending them out soon. And I've also heard from a couple of you who are still missing pins. And so I'm just going to recheck who is still missing from like the way back. We're going to get those damn pins to you, I swear. Eventually, you're going to get your pins. I know you care deeply.
One last thing before we start. We will be, it's so amazing, on a 3-week holiday break, just like last year. So, our last episode in 2022 will drop on 21st of December, and then we'll be back with the first episode of 2023 on 18th of January. All right.
It's going to be great.
Let's get into today's episode. This is about a triple homicide that took place in 1881 and is most often referred to as the Ashland tragedy. Quick content note, we will be discussing the sexual assault and brutal death of teenagers. There will also be brief, kind of speculatory mentions of suicide. Our sources are, as always, newspaper articles of the time and the book The Ashland Tragedy, Murder, a Mob and a Militia in Kentucky by H.E. Joe Castle and J.M. Huff. They're just like us. They like the M alliteration.
I was just going to say murders, mobs, and militias.
Yeah. As always, we will list all of our sources in the According album in our Facebook group. If you ever have a question about one of our sources and are not a member of the Facebook group, please don't hesitate to contact us via email, which is freshhellpodcast@gmail.com, or you could also message us via Instagram or Twitter. Also, this will be part 1 of a 2-part episode.
2 in a row. It's exciting.
Yeah.
Meaty episodes. All right. So this all takes place back in 1881 in Kentucky, in a town called Ashland. And we're going back to Kentucky. So we've done murder, mystery, and macabre in Kentucky now. I feel like we've really done a lot of Kentucky. Those goblins, though.
I think so too. Yeah.
All right. Ashland is a city in the northeast of Kentucky. It's right at the border of Ohio and close to the border with West Virginia. If you look at the map, Ashland is nestled right into one of the bends of the Ohio River, and it is just across the river and a little bit upstream from Ironton, Ohio. Ashland is the largest city in Boyd County and has a population of roughly 21,500 people. Ashland is one of the most important economic and medical centers in northeastern Kentucky. And, we like to tell you a little bit about the history of the place that we talk about in our episodes, so it's not just like, let's tell you about this place where this murder happened. No, lots of things happen there. And here are a few of the historical bits about Ashland, Kentucky. When Europeans arrived in that area of Kentucky in the 18th century, land was inhabited by the Shawnees. The first known European settlement was founded by the Pogue family, thus giving the place the name Pogue Settlement and Pogue's Landing. The Pogues had originated in, no surprise, Scotland and Ireland. The first generation had settled in Virginia and later expanded to Kentucky, where they bought 5,000 acres, which is 20 square kilometers, and they started to run a sawmill, which in any new settlement is absolutely necessary, great business, even though for the next 150 years the Pogue settlement would remain at almost an exclusive family community. It was a large, growing settlement, but sort of everybody was connected somehow. Yep. That would all change when they discovered high-grade iron in the area. Now furnaces were built to process the iron, and more people arrived at the banks of the Ohio River, and business was booming. All those people processing the iron needed infrastructure, and so this quaint little community grew and would become an industrial center for northeastern Kentucky. In 1854, Pogue's settlement was renamed Ashland. Why Ashland, though? Well, one of the founders of the Kentucky Iron, Coal, and Manufacturing Company, the company that was one of the biggest developers in that area, was a big admirer of Henry Clay Sr., a politician who represented Kentucky in the U.S. Senate and the House of Representatives. Henry Clay had an estate that was named Ashland, and so the name was chosen for Pogue's settlement. Fun fact, the first child that was born after the name change was called Ashland Pogue, as a symbol for the past and the future. No pressure on that kid or anything.
I think it's cute, though. I like it. I
do
like
too.
The symbolism there.
I do, too. I love it. Yep. I think it's good. I like the name Ashland. I like naming places after houses. It's good. So when you look at newspaper articles from the second half of the 18th century, you'll find a bunch of articles talking about the very high grade of iron that was produced in Boyd County. So it's not a surprise that the population kept almost doubling every few years, right up until the 1970s, which is when it began to decline slightly. So you can look at, 1870, less than 1,500, 1880, 3,200, 1900, we are more than doubled to 6,800, and it keeps going up. By 1930, 29,000. It peaks in 1960 with 31,283. And then most recently in the 2020 census, we're looking at 21,625 people. If you want to go to Ashland, there are several things you can do, and I would like to do. There's the Festival of Trees, Pogue Landing Days, Winter Wonderland of Lights, and the Firkin Fest Craft Beer Festival. You can visit the Paramount Arts Center. It's an old Art Deco theater rumored to be haunted. So, we have to tell you about that. So this is a quote from Teresa's Haunted History of the Tri-State on blogspot.com. Teresa's Haunted History, thank you. And this excerpt came from the Paramount Art Center's own webpage. It's not there anymore, so take it with a pinch of arsenic, as we say.
Yeah, we couldn't verify the sources, but according to Teresa, that was on the webpage. Yeah.
It's a ghost story. So the sources of it are always going to be, anytime you hear in a podcast, one of us or anybody for that matter say something like, it's said that, or it's rumored that, what we're saying is, this is what everybody claims to be the truth, but we can't find any evidence that this is true. This is good, though. This is a good one. Quote, "It is said that during the work on the Paramount Theater in its early stages, a death occurred there, and the man's ghost has forever since haunted the Paramount. A group of construction workers who were working inside the auditorium had gone to lunch except one man, a guy named Joe. When the others returned, they found Joe hanging from the stage rafters, dead. It's not known whether his death was an accident or suicide, but since then, sounds have been heard, things have gone missing, cold drafts have been felt, and some folks even claim to have seen the image of a man appear on occasion. However, it is by all means a good ghost, one who seems to look out for the benefit of the theater and its occupants. When Billy Ray Cyrus was here filming his I don't know why Billy Ray Cyrus makes me laugh. Here we are. When Billy Ray Cyrus was here filming his video for Achy Breaky Heart, he was told about the legend of Paramount Joe. Between breaks, Billy Ray would talk to Joe, laughing and joking with him, sometimes even asking for his help. It is customary to get an 8x10 photograph signed by each performer that appears at the Paramount, and then hang the photo on our wall of fame in the box office. Well, Billy Ray personally autographed large color posters to each of the female employees working here at the time, and one to Paramount Joe, who he now had a fondness for. Each lady put her poster near her desk, and Joe's was hung in the box office, near all the other performers. As time passed and the walls in the box office became too full of 8x10s signed by other performers here, the executive director felt that some of the pictures and posters needed to come down. Since there were so many of Billy Ray, she asked the women to remove their posters since they were all so similar. They're like, listen, ladies, we've got like 8x10s of Billy Ray Cyrus here. Can we just whittle it?
It's too many Billy Rays.
There's too much Billy Ray Cyrus. It's just too much. We need to whittle it down to one. Y'all have to take your posters home. And they were like, no. All right, so the article continues. She asked the women to remove their posters that were also similar, but no one wanted to take their personally autographed picture down, so they took down the one he had signed to Paramount Joe. See, this is the part where this story starts to unravel for me, because if you have 10 Billy Ray Cyrus pictures on the wall, and you've asked the 9 ladies to remove theirs and just leave the one, and instead they're like, or, hear us out, how about if we leave all ours on the wall and just take down this one? Anyway. I'm not saying this didn't happen, I'm just saying there are holes in the plausibility. I'm looking out for y'all. Quote, the next day, when the ladies came to work, every single 8x10 and poster that had been hanging neatly on the walls the night before was now lined up against the wall on the floor, their glass frames still intact. It was as if someone had carefully removed each one. To this day, Paramount Joe's poster still hangs in the Paramount in a very special part of the marquee room. It's like hidden behind the bar by the floor because there's just still too much Billy Ray Cyrus. I don't know why it's so funny to me, and also I can't get Achy Breaky Heart out of my head now.
I love that song. I'm not ashamed to admit it.
You love it?
Yeah. It's a great song.
It's good. It's a good song.
It's good.
I'm not. It's a good song. It's catchy.
It's catchy.
Yeah. All right. So now it continues. This is my second favorite story. I do love that story, though. Just the idea that there's like, why wouldn't you want to take your if I had an 8x10 autograph picture of Billy Ray Cyrus, I'd have it in my home next to my bar, right?
Yeah, definitely. Of course.
I don't know. Suspicious. I believe it, though. This all tracks for me. All right. Here's the next story. So, quote, there's another story about the time 2 new employees wanted to investigate the basement in the Paramount and some old items that had been stored there. To reach the basement, you must go through a door that is located just inside the lounge outside the ladies' restroom. This brings you to the top of the stairs. At the top of the stairs is a light switch, which will light the first section of the stairwell for you. As you progress, there is a switch that will light each area in front of you, and there is no partner switch. In other words, you must turn the light off at the same place you turned it on. The marketing director had offered to take the 2 new female employees into the basement and turned on the lights at the top of the stairs. The ladies hurried down the steps. At that moment, the marketing director was called to the phone by someone inside the office. He told the other 2 employees to hang on, he'd be right back. In their excitement, however, they did not hear him and they continued on. Recounting the story later, it was at this point that they called up to him to turn on the next light for them. As it turned out, he was on the phone longer than expected, and he met the ladies as they were coming back up the steps. Thanks for turning on the light for us, one of them said, but we can't get it to turn back off. Puzzled, he explained that he had not turned on the light for them. The expression on their faces revealed that they were not kidding with him. They led him back into the basement, only to be met by darkness. Someone had turned the light off again as well. Well, thanks, Joe, called out one of the ladies as she shivered. End quote. Well, I don't think that's creepy. I think that's polite.
It's nice.
I think so.
Joe is nice.
I think it's very nice. Also, what is the deal with theaters? Why do we immediately want to explore the basement?
Because they have all the cool stuff.
So much cool stuff. Yeah. Speaking of Billy Ray Cyrus, he was actually born in a suburb of Ashland called Flatwoods, so no wonder he chose the Paramount to shoot his video for Achy Breaky Heart there. I actually love that. I love it when people kind of give back to their kind of hometown communities as much as they can with that kind of stuff. And also for our Halloween aficionados, my favorite, you can drive to Canova, West Virginia. That might be pronounced wrong. It is 7.5 miles, which is 12 kilometers southeast of Ashland, and it's where the Canova Pumpkin House is. And every year, the owner displays 3,000 hand-carved pumpkins.
I read that the whole thing started with just 5 pumpkins, and then it kind of, snowballed. We all know how that happens.
Yeah, definitely. The house is amazing, though. It's this gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous house with these really, really impressive pumpkins. I really want to visit this pumpkin house now, though. It's on the list. So, all right. Well, what do you think? Should we actually tell them what we're here to talk about?
I think now it's time to talk about the case.
Yeah. That was some good stuff, though. We can't not talk about that haunted theater.
Plus, this case is so bad. It's so bad. And I much enjoyed hearing Annie talk about Billy Ray Cyrus signing an autograph for a friendly ghost, because that's a much more pleasant story.
I think so.
All right. As we heard before, in the second half of the 18th century, Ashland started to grow. And in 1880, the census showed 3,280 people living there. And that was a growth of 127% compared to 1870. One of the families living in Ashland were the Gibbonses. So that was Father John William Gibbons, Mother Martha Jane Rhodes Gibbons, and 3 of the children, Robert L., he was born in 1864, Julia Frances, or Fanny, how she was called, born in 1867, and Sterling, who was born in 1871. 4 older children were already off living their own lives. Martha Jane Rhodes was born in August of 1835 in Virginia. Her father had migrated from Europe to Virginia, or, that part that is now known as West Virginia, because the western part of Virginia split in 1863 to form their own state. So that was right in the middle of the American Civil War, because, they didn't want to succeed, making West Virginia the 35th state to join the Union. That might be interesting to know for some. When Martha was a young woman, she met a man who was 20 years her senior, John William Gibbons, who was born in 1814 or 1815. Interestingly enough, I found one source who thinks he was born in England. I honestly doubt it. Most sources state that he was born in Virginia as well, just like Martha was. But he was an out-of-towner. He wasn't born or living in the same town as Martha was.
Right, and hadn't lived there forever, which was so common back then. You would just be from that general 10-mile radius.
Yeah. So his learned trade was carpenter, and when he met Martha, he immediately started courting her. And Martha was not opposed to it at all, even though her family didn't approve of the stranger. There was just not much known about the man. He was so much older than Martha. And he was a widower and possibly already had a child from his first marriage. That's what they were thinking, right?
Mm.
But Martha, on the other hand, saw no problem there. John was charming. He had a bit of money. He had a trade. And she was eager to start a family of her own. So when he proposed after only a short courtship, she said yes. So now I went on Ancestry to see what we could find there. And according to Ancestry, Martha was born in August of 1837. Not 1835, like most sources state. She was born in Fayette, Virginia. John and Martha got married in 1855, which would make her 18 years old by the time of their wedding. And then I looked up John William Gibbons, and according to the finding on Ancestry, he was actually married twice, not once, twice before he met Martha. He married his first wife in 1832, and his second wife in 1836. He did have 2 daughters with her, but I only have the birth years and names of potential spouses, so we can assume that they did not die in childbirth.
Right, and people were a lot more pragmatic about those things back then, and you also find, we just saw it in the Hotel Del episode, but if he had children when his wife died, it wouldn't have been uncommon for those children to go and live with their mother's family.
Yeah.
No one expected Mr. Mom. Right.
Exactly.
Back in those days. If they had young children, for the most part, I don't think you'd be left to care for young children on your own as a man.
Plus, when he was marrying Martha in 1855, those 2 girls would have been already off living their own life.
Exactly. Yeah.
Doesn't really matter. It's just, I don't know. Do you feel the same, Annie? We look at these old cases that happened 100 or 150 years ago, and it's sometimes so easy to forget that these were real people with real emotions, and they went through so much hardship and also happiness. And we kind of only think of them as those grim-looking faces in faded photographs.
I know. I love it when you find them smiling or, just those rare. But yeah, we talk all the time about how we love historical episodes because they do remove it a little bit. It makes it a little easier to hear and to research. But you also walk that fine line because it is important to remember that these, like you said, these are people's grandparents and parents and children. And
anyhow, so John and Martha married in 1855, and they had their first child, Florence, on 27th of August, 1856. On 7th of May, 1858, Anna May was born. In 1859, the birth of Catherine, or Katie, or Kate, how she was sometimes called. On 4th of September, John William Gibbons Jr. was born. So that makes these the 4 older children who in 1881, when our case takes place, they were already on their own feet. The couple had 4 more children, Robert L., who was born on 17th of May, 1864, Julia Frances, called Fanny, 22nd of November, 1867, Sterling P., 17th of January, 1871, and finally the baby of the family, Harry S., who was born on 28th of November, 1874. That's a lot of kids, a lot of names, a lot of dates. Don't worry, you don't need to remember their birth dates and calculate their age, the time all of this takes place. We'll tell you all you need to know, and a bit more. So, during all those years, the family moved a couple of times in Virginia and West Virginia. One time they even moved to Missouri, where they purchased a small piece of land, and John was elected the town marshal. Everywhere they went, the family was well liked, the kids were nice, well behaved, made friends easily, as did their parents. John was described as a, quote, likable fellow, end quote, by his peers. But that doesn't mean that the family didn't know hard times. Trust me, they had more than their fair share. Civil War broke out while they were living in Missouri, and so John had to leave to fight. When he returned, he found that his land had been confiscated, and so he packed up his family and they moved back to West Virginia. And then another tragedy, in 1871, their son Robert, or Robbie, who was 7 years old at the time, was in an accident with a railroad cart that left him with a severely injured leg, and they needed to amputate that leg just below the knee. But Robbie didn't let that stop him, and he learned how to navigate life with just one leg. All in all, the family's life was a constant up and down. They could save a little money one day, lost most of it again the next day, and also Martha's and John's marriage was a constant up and down. I think John was a very troubled man, but we will talk more about this a little bit later. Over the years, he would leave his family for prolonged times to work, to earn money, or to simply be alone. And I guess it's kind of a combination of those two things.
You know what I meant to ask you? Was he always like this, or was this after the war? Do you think he...
That's a good question. I can imagine it was after the war.
Yeah.
Because at first he was like, wherever he went, even in Ashland, when they later moved to Ashland, they told him he should run for mayor, and he almost won, even though he just had moved there. And he was always described as really likable guy.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. I thought, oh, this man came home from war with some problems.
I think now it's a good time to take a little break for a word by this week's sponsor, The Art of Crime. We cannot say enough good things about this podcast hosted by Gavin Whitehead, and I'm 1000% certain that our Hellions will absolutely love the topics that are being covered.
Absolutely. It's so good. If you enjoy history, true crime, and art just as much as we do, and we know you do, this is the podcast for you. Season 1 is about Jack the Ripper, but it's not just the same old theories that we've heard so many times already. It's called The Unusual Suspects, Artist Accused of Being Jack the Ripper. You see where this is going. The podcast focuses on artists from Victorian London who have been named as suspects. Gavin tells you about their life, their work, and the theories that tie them to the Ripper murders.
You need to listen to episode 6 about the painter Walter Sickert. The episode tells the story of how Sickert got caught up in a Ripper conspiracy theory involving the royal family. It also teaches you a lot about how Sickert developed his unique style and how he became one of the most important and controversial British painters of the modern era. But there are even more artists being covered. Queen Victoria's favorite wig maker, an American stage actor, and Lewis Carroll, to name a few.
But this podcast is not only about the suspects. It, of course, shines a light on the women who suffered a tragic death by Jack the Ripper. Please also visit the show's webpage, artofcrimepodcast.com. It's beautiful, contains show notes, transcripts, and an archive of photos and documents for each episode.
Find the Art of Crime podcast on your favorite podcast app and follow them on Instagram at Art of Crime Podcast.
Or join their Facebook group called Art of Crime Podcast.
Yes.
For sure. Go and listen. We know that you will not regret it.
Definitely. Trust us.
Yeah. Walter Sickert was... Did you ever read Patricia Cornwell's book about Walter Sickert?
No.
She's a sort of a famous American mystery author.
I know her,
Yeah. She wrote a book about Jack the Ripper and Walter Sickert. So I'm saving this episode. I haven't listened to his episode of it yet. I need to make new ribbons, so that's going to keep me company while I do. All right. Let's get back to the murder.
Yes. Around 1880, the family had moved to Ashland, probably attracted by the prospering economy in the booming town, like so many others. They moved into a house on the corner of 28th Street and Carter Avenue, and to Fanny's delight, they lived right next to a girl her own age named Emma Carrico. She's also often referred to as Emma Thomas after her stepfather. Emma and Fanny soon become great friends. When you're a kid, it's one of the greatest things to have your best friend living right next door, right?
It's the best, yeah.
Robert started to work for Norton Iron Works, who produced 8 different kinds of nails and 500,000 pounds of nails every week, as I read in a newspaper article. At first, his co-workers might have felt a little bit sorry for him, because he was a young guy who was missing a leg. But he was a hard worker and he was just as capable as his colleagues, and they soon really admired and respected him. But then another tragedy. On 21st of November 1880, the youngest Gibbons child, Harry, died. That was 7 days before his 6th birthday.
Just devastating and all too common for the time. Not that, you think, oh, it happens all the time, they're used to it. No, of course they're not used to it. It's awful every single time it happens. Can't imagine. All right, so it's now the 23rd of December, 1881. John has been gone from home again. He'd left about 5 weeks ago to find work, and neither his wife nor his kids knew where he was, nor had they heard from him at all. But I think by now they were more used to it. Martha had planned to go on an overnight trip to Ironton for some Christmas shopping and to visit one of her older children. I think it was Katie who was living in Ironton with her husband, but we might be wrong about that. It doesn't really matter. Martha was planning on taking her youngest son, Sterling, who was 10 at the time, with her on that weekend trip. So that would leave 17-year-old Robert and 14-year-old Fanny home alone. Perfectly normal ages to be left at home alone. No problem, right?
Definitely. Especially back then.
Especially back then. But even today.
Those kids were working already.
Exactly. Yeah, they were bringing home the bacon. So Robert would be, in fact, like you just said, Robert was going to be working late. And so Martha went to ask her neighbor, Emma's mom, to see if it would be all right if Emma could come spend the night and stay at their house so that Fanny would have company and wouldn't be home all by herself until her brother got home from work. And of course, the Thomases had no problem with that because the Gibbons house was right across the street, and we can assume that the girls were absolutely just delighted to be having this sleepover. So everything's taken care of, and Martha and Sterling left on their errand. All right, so now we need to talk about Fanny and Emma, and trust us, we hate we have to even mention it because you all know what's coming. It's the kind of thing that makes all of our skin crawl. You see it mentioned over and over, and it's just this thing where you keep reading that Fanny and Emma were two very beautiful girls, and they were friendly and funny and well-liked in town, and they both looked very mature for their age.
I hate these things so much. It's kind of victim blaming, right?
Yeah.
You know, it was, she was so pretty and looked older, and she smiled at a stranger. No. Just no. It's a 14-year-old and it's a kid.
Yep.
And I know these were different times and girls were often married at 15. Still, I don't even know if I can describe the icky feeling I get when I read she was so mature or she was so physically developed for her age.
Yeah. It's really upsetting. It's victim blaming and it's also predator excusing. You know what I mean? It's like they didn't know. They were misled by curves or how big their boobs were or they were wearing a short whatever. And it happens when women prey on boys, too. It doesn't happen as commonly, but it does happen. Make no mistake. And it's not okay. It's not romantic. It's gross. And we're just always going to call out that bullshit normalization when we see it because it's not okay. And it's not like a different time. You know, it's still like, let's just not. Can we not? So Emma is over at the Gibbons house and Robert comes home from work and the kids lock up and they go to bed. So the girls were probably up, all night chatting in bed, talking about the upcoming holidays, and Emma's birthday was coming up next week on the 28th of December. On the early morning hours of Christmas Eve, so December 24th, 1881, Mrs. Thomas, across the street, she gets up and starts her daily chores. It's still dark outside, so she lit a fire probably and puts a kettle on, and as she looks out the window over to the Gibbons house, she sees a light on in one of the windows. And it looks like a candle, and she thinks, well, that's weird that the kids are already up.
I think it was 4 a.m., somewhere around 4 a.m.
Yeah, early. So she steps out to get a better look, and that's when, to her horror, she realizes that she's not seeing a candle, she's seeing fire. The Gibbons house is on fire. She runs over, she's screaming for help at the top of her lungs. She tries to open the front door, but it's locked. She runs around to the back of the house, and it's open, but she can't enter the house. The heat and smoke is just way too much. And she's screaming the children's names, she's yelling, and in the meantime, her screams have alerted and woken up the neighbors, and they all come running trying to help. A bucket brigade is formed immediately, but the small creek closest to the house is mostly frozen, so it's hard to get water into the buckets. One of the men breaks a window just above Robbie's bed and reached in to try to grab the boy, but when he feels around in the bed, he realizes that Robbie is not there. Then he goes to the window closest to Fanny's bed, breaks the window, peeks through, and through the smoke, he's able to see a body lying on the floor. With some help, he's able to get through the broken window, reach the arm, and pull the body to the window and outside. It was Emma. Then they found Fanny on the bed and got her out of the house. Finally, after looking frantically, they found Robbie under the stairs. All 3 of the children were dead, Emma and Fanny were severely burned and disfigured. They laid the lifeless bodies on the ground and tried to save as much of the Gibbons' belongings as possible. Even though the townspeople tried their best to extinguish the fire, the house still burned down completely. Only the chimney stayed intact. And now the morning dawns and it's starting to get light, and people are now starting to take a serious look at the bodies. And of course, their first thought was that they had either burned to death or died because of smoke inhalation. But now that it's getting light outside, they realize that actually something horrible had happened to these kids. Their skulls were bashed in, there was blood on their clothes and on the bed sheets that could be saved, and the sheets that had covered the girls reeked of lamp oil. There was no doubt anymore that these children had been murdered, but who would do such a horrible thing? The bodies were taken to a neighbor's house to be thoroughly examined, and the coroner concluded the following. This is a direct quote from the book The Ashland Tragedy by Castle and Huff. Quote, Doctors J.W. Martin, J.H. Wade, and W.F. Tiernan were also summoned, and their initial examination produced the following individual reports. Robert Gibbons. The upper part of the left parietal bone was driven in for an area that would square about 3 inches, some of the lacerated brains running out. Fanny Gibbons. Found entire surface of the body changed. The whole frontal bone was driven back on the brain and squeezing a part of it out of the skull. Emma Thomas, Carico. The surface of the body burned, the parietal and temporal bones on the left side were driven down on the brain, and the irregular shape of the fracture would square an area of about 2.5 inches. The examinations revealed enough for all 3 physicians to believe that both girls were raped. End quote. And not only the bodies were examined, the remains of the house were searched, and they found an empty oil can, an axe with blood and hair on it, and behind a fence they found a crowbar. So 2 probable murder weapons, which led to the conclusion that there might be at least 2 perpetrators that they were looking for.
Which makes sense. They were 3 kids, teenagers. It would have been hard for one attacker to control all 3. Not impossible, but definitely hard.
Yeah.
And I think after all we know of Robbie, he would have put up a hell of a fight to save his sister and Emma.
They would have had to immediately incapacitate Robbie.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
But if it was one person, like if we go right back to the very beginning to Smutty Nose, if it's one person and that's hard odds.
Yeah. So now the whole town was in an uproar. They wanted to find whoever was responsible for this atrocity. Of course they wanted. A citizen committee was formed and money was raised, first of all as a reward for information that would lead to an arrest, but also to hire a detective to investigate the case. And in the meantime, a couple of men had traveled to Ironton to inform Mrs. Gibbons of what had happened. I'm just glad she didn't read about it in the newspaper first, but I don't know, can you imagine that poor woman?
No, I can't. It's awful. And every time we talk about this stuff, it just... No.
And she had just lost her youngest child.
Yes.
A year ago.
And now she's lost 2 more of her children. And she doesn't even know where her husband is.
Yeah, right. The victims were buried on Monday, the 27th of December, 1881 at the Ashland Cemetery. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people. For example, more than 80 of Robbie's co-workers attended. The funeral procession was the largest the town had ever seen. At the cemetery, the 2 mothers stood weeping over their children's coffins, and it was just heartbreaking. But one person was missing. Nobody had seen or heard anything from Mr. Gibbons. Where was he? And did he even know about the murders yet? The detective who was hired was a Mr. Norris, but he was not the only detective to come to Ashland. Actually, quite a few were after the reward that was constantly raised and finally stood at $3,000. And according to the inflation calculator, that's almost $88,000 today.
That's a lot.
That's quite some horse money, carpet money, horse money.
Yeah, for sure.
When Mr. Norris arrived, he started his investigation immediately. He examined what was left of the crime scene. I think by then even the chimney had kind of collapsed. He interrogated friends and neighbors and, of course, Mrs. Gibbons. And soon he was convinced that Mr. Gibbons was the murderer. His reasons being... Well, first of all, he was absent from the funeral. Nobody knew where he was. But Mr. Norris had learned that John was an avid newspaper reader. He read the news every day, if possible, and the murder was national news. How could he not have heard about it? And if he did hear about it and still hadn't returned home? I mean, that's extremely suspicious. Second, the crowbar and axe belonged to the Gibbons, so Norris concluded that the murderer must have been someone who knew the house. His third reason was that John and Martha had marital problems on the regular, and sometimes he would act violent against his wife. He also seemed depressed for years already and had talked about suicide in the past. And lastly, there were witness reports of a boat landing on the Kentucky side shore of the Ohio River on the night of the murders, just outside of Ashland, and a couple of hours later, the man returned to the boat and quietly rowed away. The next day, the boat was found floating on the river with not a soul in it, and clearly that must have been old Gibbons, and he probably jumped into the river to drown himself after murdering his children and the neighborhood girl. And for the rape, Norris had an explanation for that as well. Well, first he had the explanation that he might have mistaken Emma for his wife, but then he said no. In his opinion, the rape didn't happen. The coroners had made a mistake. I don't know, apparently it never crossed his mind that a father could rape his own daughter. I don't know, it's weird. But he was so convinced that the rape didn't happen. There was no rape.
It is weird, yeah. So this is from the Courier-Journal, Louisville, Kentucky, 28 of December, 1881, page 2. The title is The Ashland Tragedy. On the track of the murderer, Old Man Gibbons, the guilty man, Ashland Special in Inquirer. Tonight, the mystery of the great triple murder at this place was solved, and Detective Norris expects to arrest the murderer within a short time if the perpetrator of the crime has not already committed suicide, as it is now thought he has. There is no doubt existing in the mind of Mrs. Gibbons that her husband is the guilty party, and she related to Mr. Norris this evening her reasons for so thinking. After he informed her that his opinion of Gibbons's guilt was well nigh established, Mr. Norris found out that several weeks ago, Gibbons went to the house of his daughter in Ironton, where Mrs. Gibbons was on a visit, but Mrs. Gibbons declined to see him. He then attempted to see her 2 weeks ago in Ashland, and Mrs. Gibbons advised with her son Robbie as to whether she should see her husband or not, and the boy Robbie, knowing his father's character, would not advise her to see him. It turns out now that the leading physicians who held the post-mortem on the girls do not believe that there was any rape committed, and that strengthened the detective in his opinions that nobody but Old Man Gibbons had any motive for killing the family. Norris reasoned that the old man became crazed over the matter of his domestic affairs and made up his mind that he would end it. Mrs. Gibbons' statement to the detective was that her husband had asked her to commit suicide and proposed to kill himself also, and she refused, stating she did not want to leave the children in the cold world. One day he got a large butcher knife and pranced around the house with it. Pranced, was that... It just... Okay. One day he got a large butcher knife and pranced around the house with it, sharpening it and saying that he was going to use it. Finally, the weapon was taken from him and concealed. Mrs. Gibbons claimed that her husband had frequently abused her in the most violent manner. He would spit in her face, he would call her a fiend, and he said he wished she was out of the way. He asserted that there was no use of any of them living. Gibbons is about 5 feet 9 inches tall, weighs about 140 pounds, is erect in his carriage, has a ruddy complexion, gray hair, and sore eyes. There are some interesting choices made in the language in this article. All right. It continues. More things you need to know about Gibbons. Quote, he is a smooth-tongued fellow and tries to impress strangers with his importance, but does not look a man in the eye when talking to him. He wore a suit of blue clothing when he was last seen in Ashland. By occupation, he is a carpenter. Detective Norris is on the trail of Gibbons, and strong faith is expressed that he will find him, whether alive or dead. The Citizens Committee have confidence in Norris's ability to find the guilty party, and the detective has been instructed to hunt him down if it takes all winter. End quote. So, I think there we do see the fact that he was prancing around with a knife, and then just the way they report that they, eventually got it back away from him and, no biggie, it seems like there had been some serious mental illness going on.
But don't you have the feeling that it's also exaggerated?
Yes.
For example, when they say that the coroners now are convinced that there was no rape, I don't think that's actually true.
No.
I think it was Norris' idea and he kind of twisted their words or made them, doubt themselves. Yeah.
And this is that era. This is when they started. This was the same problem we had with last week's episode with the Hotel Del and who this woman was. This is where we start to see a lot of that journalism where it's big newspapers are competing and it's not all fact. This was a problematic time in news. So.
Plus, I also think that Norris was the one giving the information most of the time to the press.
Too. Yeah.
And he would have kind of
given his own story.
Yeah, and to make him fit the narrative.
Yeah, exactly.
As the villain here. Yeah.
Yep, totally agree.
So, for Norris, obviously the case was closed. John Gibbons was the murderer, and a reward was offered for John's body. The river was searched. Descriptions of John were sent to all major newspapers in the country, and John W. Gibbons quickly was one of the most hated men in the United States. But don't worry, while they were looking for John, they were not idle. Many men were arrested in the meantime because they were suspicious, because they appeared to be nervous, or they said something incriminating while drunk, or, the worst, simply because they were black. Law enforcement really had their hands full with trying to keep all of these innocent men alive, because every time rumors about an arrest spread, a lynch mob would form and make their way to jail and demand that the suspect was handed over to them. But yes, the main suspect was John Gibbons, and everyone and their grandma were looking for him. But there was one man who didn't buy Norris' theory, and that was Deputy U.S. Marshal James Heflin. Heflin had made a name for himself for cracking down on moonshiners in Kentucky. This is an excerpt from an article from the Chicago Tribune, 13th of March, 1881, so the same year, page 8. Quote, "Fight with moonshiners. Lexington, Kentucky, March 12. Letcher County is one of the wildest mountain counties, and Carr's Fork is the worst part of the county, where moonshiners are supposed to be thick. Deputy Marshal James Heflin, with a squad of 10 men, raided into Letcher and after capturing a still house and 5 prisoners on Rockhouse Fork, made a dash into the Carr's Fork country. The news of his coming went before, and the moonshiners and their friends gathered and proposed to give the foe battle. They secured an old cannon left by John Brown in his raid of 61, loaded it to the muzzle with rusty nails and broken pot metal. They manned the piece, and when the marshal and his forces came near enough, fired, but aimed too high and the load passed over them."
This is some crazy shit right here.
The noise of the explosion threw the officers into disorder, but they quickly rallied and after a volley from their carbines charged up the pass with drawn pistols. The moonshiners fired a few scattering shots, but the steady firing of the marshal's party drove them out of their ambush and they fled across the ridge and down the creek toward Breathitt County. It is supposed that several of the moonshiners were wounded or killed, as bloodstains were found on the ground for some distance. The marshal's party escaped without injury, and after capturing the hill, they spiked the cannon and threw it over the cliff into the river. The government party went on to Breathitt County, having sent their 5 prisoners to the jail at Grayson. End quote. So, this is an old-timey, tough, no-nonsense U.S. Marshal.
That's right.
I think we can all picture him. He probably had a very impressive mustache.
He's played by Sam Elliott.
Definitely. I was thinking Sam Elliott. Yes, you can read my mind, woman.
Yes. Okay, so Heflin sets out to prove Norris wrong, and that means he has to find Gibbons. And I think this is a great place to stop for now, because next week we have a lot to talk to you about, to tell you the rest. Does Heflin find John? Was John the murderer? And if not, who? Yeah, it's a lot. It's going to be terrible.
Do you have something good?
I do. Mine is, well, sad news first. We lost my uncle the week before Thanksgiving. So it was nice that we had, for the first time since COVID, some of our UK family that came over for Thanksgiving, which was really nice. It was just really nice to spend that family time together, you know. And also, we watched your television debut. You were wonderful.
We haven't mentioned it yet here, I think. We should tell them what's going on.
Have we not talked about it?
No, I think just in the group and for Patreon.
Oh, we should tell people. That should be your something good. And let's discuss. Seriously.
What happened was that I was a participant in an Austrian quiz show on TV.
That's right.
And Annie watched it with her whole family.
We did.
Austrian quiz show in German.
In German. Every time they asked a question, we were all shouting out what we thought the question might be. We talked over everybody except you. Like, every time they were talking to other people, we were like just commenting. We were talking shit about everybody and trying to figure out what they were talking about because we'd get like every fifth word. You were wonderful, though. It was great. You looked beautiful. My dad just kept saying, my dad was like, I'm so proud of her. She looks great. Look how calm and poised she is. I was like, I know. She's very, very professional. Yes. And they asked you about the podcast.
Yeah.
And you talked about it.
They asked me the name of the podcast, which I was very much surprised because usually you can't name these kind of things on public television, right?
Right.
They asked me, and then I told them that I'm doing the podcast with my friend from America who I've never met. And he was like, well, how did that happen? And I thought, well, I met this wonderful woman online and she just had the most amazing voice and we liked the same stuff. So I needed to do a podcast with her.
Oh, we were wondering what you were saying. I kept saying things like, obviously I was making up horrific stuff. I was like, I'm trapped in a nightmare with this American bitch who can't get her shit together. I'm like, I have no idea what they're saying. But, It was great.
It was fun.
You did so
good.
well. You did
Thank
so
you.
well. I'm so proud of you. I think that's probably the most money either of us will ever make on an hourly basis. Like, if you divide up how much money
That's
you
true.
won.
That's true.
You did so well.
So I won three episodes. I could defend my throne.
She knocked out
times.
the first quiz master.
Mm-hmm.
And then
She was a smart woman.
she was.
And you know what was funny? After she lost to me, I talked to her afterwards and she was like, yeah, when I met you and talked to you, there were 4 people who were like trying to become the next quizmaster. And I was one of the 4, right?
Yeah.
And she told me, yeah, when I met you, I knew you were going to be dangerous for me today.
Oh, see?
I didn't know why, but well, yeah.
Yeah. No, she was good. We couldn't figure out how the scoring worked either. Paul was like, we figured out time was part of it.
But the funny thing was, the whole time, it was so stressful. It went by so fast, like it's 30 minutes. And it was really stressful. And I didn't understand how much money I had won. And after the second episode, they told me I had like 8,000 euros. And I told Philip, I texted him, I said, I don't know. They keep saying I have 8,000 euros, but I don't understand how. I was like, what's even going on? I was just answering questions. Like, that was enough for me. I didn't even care about the money, just answering.
Just answer the questions. You did great. You did such a great job, really. You looked so good. You didn't look nervous. Like, you came off as like friendly and calm, and it's great. And we already have one new listener who heard about us from watching Quizmaster. Welcome, new listener in Austria.
Welcome.
I assume Austria.
Yeah, I think so. You'd think that's my something good. There were a lot of good things happening lately, but also my real something good this week is that we just had our 7th wedding anniversary.
Yay!
And that's really, truly, my husband is one of the best things in my life.
Oh, yeah.
Really. He's such a great man.
I remember when he came home and I said, after a little while, I said, so how is it going? Because, he hasn't been home this long in a long time. And you were just like, I'm just so happy. We're so happy. That's how Paul and I are. Like, when your best friend is your partner, it's just...
Yeah. I think I said we're having the best time. We're laughing the whole day.
Yes, that's exactly what you said. I'm so happy. I can't wait to meet him. What else? Patreon. Thank you so much to everybody who has joined our Patreon. You can go to patreon.com to see what our tiers are like. Like we said, is it the 19th of December that game night?
19th of December. Mm-hmm.
And we're going to be uploading. Johanna just opened my Halloween package, which she only just opened it because I didn't get it to her in time. And then, so there's some fun stuff in there. And
yes, we did an
your
unboxing.
Christmas package soon. And what else?
Please, if you enjoyed this episode or any of our other episodes, go to your podcast app and see if you can leave us a rating and or review. That would be great.
We'd be so grateful.
go to our webpage, freshhellpodcast.com. There you find links to our merch store. We have a Krampus mug on now. To our Patreon, to our Instagram, to our Facebook group, which is the best group of people. Seriously.
The best.
I don't think there is a topic you couldn't come talk about in the Facebook group.
No.
Like whatever you need, there's always somebody there who's going to listen to you and give you advice.
And also somebody that's going to know what they're talking about.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. It's a really great group of people for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Please tell your pets we said hi. Tell them we miss them. Hug them, love them, cuddle them, feed them. Give them treats, take them to the vet. Let them sleep under the blanket if they ask for it. Be kind to your fellow human being. At least once. Give them the benefit of the doubt. Especially now around Christmas time. Everybody's stressed out. Like me, I love Christmas. It's my favorite time of the year. Like Annie is with Halloween. I'm like that with Christmas. And still, I get stressed out because there's lots of things to do. So,
I know. I spent all day yesterday wiring together. I need more, swags, like faux greenery swags. So I wait till the end of Christmas, like at the end of the year last year, and then I bought them all up while they were on clearance, but they're still the cheap ones, so they were like 99 cents each. And all day yesterday, my dad and I were just wiring together 2 scrawny, sad-looking things to make it look like one fuller, and now they look fine. Like I'm getting there. Oh my gosh.
Good.
It's never going to end.
So, be kind to your fellow human being. And the most important part, and also especially around Christmas, be kind to yourself. Nothing has to be perfect, really. Lean back, enjoy a little bit. Okay?
That's right.
It's hard, I know. And that's it.
That's it. Just those things. That's all. And if the holidays have you going through hell,
Keep going. Tschüss.
bye.